Hi, it's Greg Burdine, pastor of Faith Baptist Church. I've got a challenge for you today. I want you to really think about something. Following my sermon on Sunday, when I talked about Jesus encountering a guy who hadn't walked probably in 38 years, do you want to be made well? Sometimes the saddest sentence is also the shortest sentence. When Jesus asked that man at Bethesda if he wanted to be made well, the man answered, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool." Now, beneath his explanation was a deeper ache. I have nobody. His legs weren't his only burden. He was lonely. It's possible to be surrounded by people, and he was, and still feel completely alone. The pool of Bethesda had 5 porches filled with sick people, and the man was in a crowd, but he didn't have a companion. Everyone near the pool had needs of his own. And when the water moved, they were competitors rather than friends. He didn't need another face in the crowd. He needed somebody who would see him and recognize him and acknowledge him. And that's when Jesus showed up. Jesus came directly to him. And before Jesus healed his body, Jesus gave him his attention. Christ knew how long he'd suffered. He'd heard the man's answer. He spoke to him personally. And the man said, "I have no one." But he was really saying to the Son of God, "Do you care?" He felt forgotten at that very moment that Jesus was standing right beside him. That's an important truth for lonely seasons of our life. Our feelings are real, but they're not always reliable. And they're not really to help us to understand God's presence. In the Old Testament, there's a prophet named Elijah, and he sat under a juniper tree convinced that he was all alone and nobody cared. His work was accomplished, and he really didn't do much of it at all. God cared for him, spoke to him, gave him another assignment, and reminded him that there were still thousands in Israel who had not bowed to the false prophets. Elijah felt isolated, and it narrowed his vision. God hadn't abandoned him. And perhaps you've said the same thing. Nobody cares. Nobody understands. Nobody checks up on me. Nobody knows what I'm going through or what it's like. And you may have legitimate reasons for feeling that way. And maybe you have been forgotten by some. But Christians should never be alone and feel alone. In John 5, it shows us that Jesus moves toward people who often are overlooked. He's not intimidated by the length of your struggle or put off by the heaviness of the story that you've been living. Now, there's also a challenge here for us as believers. We should not only identify with a lonely man, we should also ask whether we have noticed those people who are near us. And say, maybe perhaps without words, "I don't have anybody." A widow who eats her meals alone, a teenager who never feels included, a caregiver whose world has become very small, a new person at church who smiles, slips into a seat, and leaves without having a meaningful conversation with anybody. We can't heal every hurt, but we can refuse to let people suffer invisibly. I call it the ministry of presence. It's often quieter than preaching, and it's less noticeable than a big event. It may be a phone call, an invitation to lunch, cup of coffee, ride to an appointment, or just willingness to listen without rushing. Galatians chapter 6 tells believers to bear one another's burdens, and sometimes bearing a burden means just simply noticing that they exist. So if you're lonely, take one honest step today. Tell a trusted believer instead of waiting for someone to guess what's wrong. Join the group you've been watching from a distance. Ask for prayer. Loneliness often urges us to withdraw and get more lonely, but healing frequently requires the courage to be known. That's a scary thing, but I encourage you to do that. And now, if you're not lonely right now, ask God to make you attentive. Look beyond the people who are easiest to talk with and notice the person that other people pass by or maybe are off in a corner. You may become part of God's answer to somebody's sentence, "I have no one." That man at Bethesda discovered that his loneliness wasn't the end of his story. Jesus saw him. Jesus came near. Jesus spoke. Jesus is still that friend who moves toward forgotten people. So today, receive his presence. Then offer the gift of presence to somebody else. God bless you.